Hey everyone, this is Ronak Ahuja. I welcome you all again. Today in this video, we'll be discussing the tax rates that are applicable to the corporates, that is the companies, including the domestic companies. Please note the tax rates that we'll be discussing in this video would be applicable for the financial year 2024-25. This means these tax rates would be applicable for the returns that are due for filing on the 31st October or the 30th of November 2025. Additionally, we'll be discussing the options of concessional tax rates available to the companies under different sections. So without any further delay, let's quickly get on to the job. The companies have two options to choose from. The first option is the regular rates of tax or the minimum alternate tax, which we also call as MAT. And the second option is the concessional rate of taxes, which is applicable only to certain companies that satisfy certain criteria. We'll be discussing both of these options, but let's first start with the first option, which is the regular rates of tax or the minimum alternate tax. For regular rates of tax, let's first divide these companies into two different categories. The first is the domestic company, and the second one is the companies other than the domestic company. Please note the regular rates of taxes for domestic companies and companies other than the domestic companies would be different. So, for ease of understanding, let's term the regular rates of taxes for domestic companies as R1 and for companies other than the domestic companies as R2. Let's move ahead. Let's divide domestic companies into further two categories, which would be companies engaged in manufacturing and companies that are not engaged in manufacturing. For companies engaged in manufacturing, the tax rates would be R1 or rates as provided under section 115BA. So the tax rates for the companies engaged in manufacturing would be R1 or as per section 115BA. This is the option that is available to the companies that are engaged in manufacturing. They can either choose the regular rates of tax, which is R1, or the rates as provided under section 115BA. Further, please note section 115BA can be opted for only if the conditions therein are satisfied. We will be discussing it later on. So this is the first step to calculation of taxes for domestic companies engaged in manufacturing. The second step is calculation of taxes as per the MAT provision, which means taxes on the book profits. Once the taxes are calculated as per the first step and the second step, the higher of these two taxes is considered as the tax payable. This means tax calculated by step 1 and step 2 are compared with each other, and whichever is higher is considered as the tax liability of such company. Moving on to companies that are not engaged in manufacturing. For companies that are not engaged in manufacturing, the first step towards calculation of taxes would be calculation of taxes as per the regular rates, which is R1. Once the taxes are calculated as per step 1, then again taxes are calculated as per step 2, which is calculation of taxes as per MAT provisions. Again, higher of these two taxes would be considered as tax payable by such company. The only difference that you can see in the manner of calculation of taxes is that the domestic companies which are engaged in manufacturing have an additional option to choose from rates that are provided under section 115BA. This option is not available to companies that are not engaged in manufacturing. This is the only difference between two. Rest, everything remains the same. Moving on to calculation of taxes for companies other than the domestic companies. In case of companies other than the domestic companies, the first step would remain the same. That is the calculation of taxes as per the regular rates. However, Please note, the regular rates in case of companies other than the domestic companies would be different than the rates of the domestic companies. That's why we are denoting it as R2. The second step would again remain the same, and the taxes would be calculated as per the MAT provisions. Again, the higher of the two taxes would be considered as the tax payable by such company. Now, let's quickly understand what these R1, R2 and rates as per section 115BA actually mean, along with the taxes as per the MAT provisions. Let's quickly move to that. The first is the regular rates of tax for domestic companies, which we denoted by R1, where in case the total turnover of the company in the financial year 22-23 does not exceed 400 crores, the tax rate that would be applicable would be 25% of the total income. In case it exceeded 400 crores, the tax rate would be 30%. Note, this rate of tax is for companies which are domestic companies, irrespective of whether it's a manufacturing company or not. Moving on to rates as per section 115BA. Section 115BA is an optional rate of tax that is applicable to certain manufacturing entities, only if they satisfy the conditions as provided under this section. The rate of tax here would be 25% of the total income calculated as per subsections 2 and subsection 3 of 115BA. However, the manufacturing company would be allowed to opt for this tax rate only if it has been incorporated or set up on or after 1st of March 2016. In case the company needs to opt for this scheme, it will have to file a separate form, which is Form 10IB, on the income tax portal. Further, please note there are other conditions that are also mentioned under this section, under subsection 2 and subsection 3. These conditions will also have to be satisfied before this tax rate is opted for. Moving on to taxes as per MAT provisions. Minimum alternate tax. The minimum alternate tax provisions are not only applicable to domestic companies, but also all other companies, including foreign companies. The tax rates as per the MAT provisions would be 15% of the book profits. Viewers, please note 15% of the book profits and not the total income. In all the earlier discussions, we had been using the word total income as per the provisions of the income tax. However, in this case, we are using the word book profits. Now, what exactly book profits mean? Book profits means the profits as calculated by the provisions laid down by the section 115JB. Section 115JB enumerates the list of items that need to be added to or reduced from the net profits of the company from its P&L account. The profits that are arrived at after making these adjustments is known as book profits, as you can see it from the table towards my right. Please note the calculation of book profits needs to be dealt with separately and hence will be covered in our next videos. Moving on to regular rates of taxes for companies other than the domestic companies, which was denoted by R2. Regular rates of taxes for companies other than the domestic companies. Please note, these rates of taxes are applicable only to companies that are not domestic companies. Now, where the total income of such companies includes any income in the form of royalty or fee for technical services received from the government or any individual on or after 31st of March 1961 until the 1st of April 1976 in accordance with the agreement, then in such a case 50% of tax rate would be applicable on such portion of the income. On the balance, 35% of the tax rate would be applicable. So this was regular rates of taxes for companies other than the domestic companies. So all these that we discussed until now was the first option that is available to all the companies. That is the option of regular rates of tax or the minimum alternate tax. Now we move on to the second option, which is the concessional rate of tax. Remember, the concessional rate of taxes is not available to all the companies. It is available only to some selected companies which satisfy certain criteria. Let's quickly move to the concessional rate of taxes now. Concessional rate of tax. Again, we further subdivide this to two parts: domestic companies and companies other than domestic companies. In case of companies other than domestic companies, no concessional tax rates would be applicable, and such companies would be required to pay taxes only as per option 1, which is either the regular rates of tax or as per MAT. Moving on to tax rates for domestic companies. The concessional tax rates for domestic companies would again require subdivision of domestic companies into two parts: companies engaged in manufacturing and the companies not engaged in manufacturing. Where in case the companies are engaged in manufacturing and have been incorporated or set up on or after 1st of October 2019 and up to 31st of March 2024, then in such a case they would be eligible to opt for concessional rate of taxes as per section 115BAA and 115BAB. So these companies will have the option to choose from two concessional rates of taxes provided under section 115BAA and 150BAB. For all the other manufacturing entities that do not fall within this period will have only one option of concessional tax rate, which is section 115BAA. That too if they satisfy the conditions set forth by that section. Now we move on to the companies that are not into manufacturing. For companies that are not into manufacturing, for them also only one option would be available for concessional tax rates. That too for section 115BAA. Now let's move on to what these sections actually mean and what are the tax rates under these sections, namely 115BAA and 115BAB. Let's quickly move to that. Section 115BAA offers tax rates at the rate 22%. In case any company wants to opt for this tax rate, will have to file a form, that is Form 10IC, electronically. However, please note 22% would be on total income as calculated in the manner provided under subsections 2, 3 and 4 of this section, that is 115BAA. Moving on to the other concessional rate of section, which is 115BAB. Section 115BAB offers concessional rate of tax at the rate 15% for new manufacturing companies that have been incorporated and registered from the 1st of October 2019 until the 31st of March 2024. In case the assessee wants to opt for this concessional tax rate, then in such a case it will have to file a form called 10ID electronically. So these were the two concessional rates that are offered by two different sections to domestic companies. So to summarize, in case of domestic company engaged in manufacturing and that has started its operations on the 1st of October 2019 until the 31st March 2024, this would be the tax rate. The ones highlighted in cream color is the option 1 and the one in the yellow color is the option 2. For companies that are engaged in manufacturing but haven't started their operations in between the said period, then in such a case this would be the tax rates. Again, the cream color is option 1 and option 2 is the yellow color. For all the other domestic companies which are not engaged in manufacturing, for them the tax rates would be this. For companies other than the domestic company, only option 1 is available. No concessional rate of taxes is available for company other than the domestic companies. So these were the tax rates and the options for concessional tax rates that are applicable to the corporates for the previous year 2024-25. The returns for the previous year 24-25 are due on the 31st of October 2025. Please do remember to adhere to the deadline. About the video, in case you couldn't follow any part, please do remember to give us a feedback in the comment section or mail us at talklevies@gmail.com. Thank you and stay tuned.